run by people who know nothing about food and agriculture. And the agriculture industry knows nothing about the environment. Is that a fair statement of the current state of affairs?
Well, yeah, it probably is. In fact, as a farmer, among other things, I'm deeply appreciative that the planners decided to start this conference with a plenary on food, because through much of my experience, at least as a farmer, it's generally understood that environmentalists think that farmers wear the black hats because they're destroying the environment, and farmers think that the environmentalists are wearing the black hats because they keep them from feeding the world. And I think that we're rapidly reaching a point now where we're both recognizing that that's a dysfunctional way of thinking about things, because environmentalists are starting to, and conservationists are starting to recognize that you can't simply preserve a piece of the environment, that farmers have to be a part of that. You can't have a healthy environment without having healthy agriculture. And farmers are beginning to realize that without a healthy environment and a healthy wildlife, particularly, well, there's a number of things you could mention, but pollinators being one, that they can't have healthy farms. So we're at that juncture now where we can begin, I think, to sit down at the same table and look at working for the same goals. And so it's very enlightening to me that we have the opportunity to start this conversation this morning. And I think as we do that, one of the things that, to me, and I've been involved in sustainable agriculture for over 30 years, and I can tell you that what I thought was sustainable 30 years ago in my own farm is not going to be sustainable now, or particularly as we move into the future, because we are now rapidly reaching a point where we are going to be living on a fundamentally different planet than we have in the past 30 years. So the decades ahead are going to be some very challenging decades, and we have to work at together how we're going to address those challenges. And I want to this morning just identify 5 of those challenges that will fundamentally change the planet that we live in and the way we do our food and agriculture, let alone the way in which we try to maintain a healthy environment. I should also say that one of the things that I think we're reaching this, when we're reaching this point that I mentioned, that it might be instructive to remember a point that Leopold made back in the 1930s, and that is that the separation of pain and wild exists only in the imperfections of the human mind. And I think that's an important kind of thing for us to keep in mind. So let's look at how we do it. So the 5 big challenges that we're going to be facing, which will fundamentally change the way we do food and agriculture, is the end of cheap energy, our current industrial food system, and let's acknowledge that our food system is part of the industrial economy and functions in much the same way. Specialization, simplification of management, economies of scale. And the objective of all of that is maximum production and short-term return. That's what every farmer has to function on. He's got to be successful. And one of the ways that we've been able to do that successfully over the last century or so is with adequate amounts of cheap energy. The era of cheap energy is now over. So we can't continue to do what we've been doing, assuming the cheap energy is going to be there. The second reason that we've been able to be successful with this highly specialized monoculture agriculture is because we've had relatively stable climates. And abnormally stable climate, as the National Academy of Sciences pointed out back in 1975. That's not a part of the future. Even if you want to deny the impact of greenhouse gases, this is not the norm for the planet. So we're not going to have those stable climates to continue to have 92% of cultivated land and just 2 crops as we do in Iowa, corn and soybeans. The third challenge that we're going to be facing is that this industrial system of agriculture has also been dependent on surplus amounts of fresh water. 70% of the freshwater resources on this planet are used just for agricultural irrigation. And we're drawing down our freshwater resources all across the planet at an unsustainable rate. We can't continue to do that. Thirdly, we've had enormous reserves of biodiversity and genetic diversity which have evolved over the millions and millions of years of the evolution of the biotic community on this planet. And we have been destroying that biodiversity and that genetic diversity in the interest of specialization and the industrial economy. And so as we look into the future now, and according to the FAO, just in the last 100 years, we have lost about 3/4 of our crop varieties and about 1/3 of our animal breeds. So we need to restore that diversity if we're going to be able to adapt to these new future scenarios that we're going to be involved in. And then finally, as Bob has already mentioned, soil. We have depleted the biological health of our soil. It's not just the soil erosion, it's the depletion of biological health. And again, just to give you one idea of how these are interrelated, the Rodale Institute has done some research now to determine how healthy soil is related to the amount of water that we need for irrigation. And what they've discovered is that if soil has 1% organic matter, which is only one indicator of a healthy soil, then the soil can absorb and retain about 33 pounds of water per cubic yard. If it's 5% organic matter, it's 195 pounds. So we could reduce our irrigation requirements by a factor of 6 simply by restoring the biological health of our soil. The same thing is true of the fertility of the soil and all these other things. So here's the challenge in front of us. And Harriet, I think last night mentioned, we ought to think about what are some of the new questions. Well, here's the new question. I think our question now is how do we feed 9 million people? And that's the wrong question. Because what it does is it still asks us how can we force nature to do what we want to do. The new question now should be how can we maintain a healthy biological ecosystem? And by healthy meaning its capacity for self-renewal and self-regulation. That's what we need to move forward. How do we maintain a healthy ecosystem in the ecosystem in which we live, in the watershed that we live, and then how do we eat healthy from that? That's the new question I think that we need to address, and I hope that we can work together this morning.
Great.